Hello again, everyone. We are going to continue thinking about and looking at some of the objections and responses that Norcross considers with regard to his paper on puppies, pigs, and factory farming. So the next objection that we're going to consider is based upon the idea that what Fred does is intend to kill these puppies, to torture these puppies. Whereas what's happening on factory farms with regard to factory farming is not intending to kill these animals, but only it's a matter of foreseeing that their death is imminent. And this involves what's called the doctrine of double effect, which I need to spell out in a little more detail here. All right, so the doctrine of double effect has been really important, really influential throughout the history of philosophy and moral theory more specifically. But there's a lot of details here. I'm not going to be able to go through all of the different details. But the basic idea with regard to this doctrine is that when we are deciding to do something, if we're considering some particular action that has two different effects, one effect might be intended, right? That's the goal, and that has to be something good. Whereas, what we have to do in order to achieve that goal might actually be bad. But if it's not intended, if it's the good thing that we're intending, then the bad action might be justified. So for instance, if somebody was pointing a gun at my daughter and I decide to shoot that person in order to save my daughter's life, well, I would not necessarily be intending to kill the person pointing the gun at her life. Instead, I'm intending to save my daughter. It's just a kind of a side effect, you might say, that the other person has to die in order to save my daughter's life. This is a kind of self-defense sort of example. Or you might say, well, look, maybe we're at war, and we're trying to blow up a bunch of different strategic buildings that have like ammunition or other weapons in some city. And it turns out that there's some casualties, some civilian casualties. Well, we're not intending to blow up those civilians. We're intending to blow up that building that has ammunition and weapons in it. So the bad effect of killing some innocent civilians in the process, that wasn't intended, so it's justified in this case. So I'm not going to spell this out in a lot more detail, but the basic idea is we aim for the good that is intended. We do not intend to do the bad effect. It is only foreseen. Right? So in this particular objection, what's happening here is it's trying to point out that what Fred is doing is he is intending to kill and torture the puppies in order to obtain the cocamone hormone that will allow him to experience pleasure from eating chocolate. But that's not the case when it comes to factory farming. When we're thinking about factory farming, somebody could object by saying, look, the suffering that's involved with killing different animals like chickens or cows or pigs or what have you, we're not intending for them to suffer. We would prefer that they couldn't suffer. Rather, what we're intending to do is feed the population. We're intending to make sure that people don't starve. We're intending to make sure that our economy still works well. We're not intending the suffering. We're simply intending to provide health and nourishment to the public. So the suffering that occurs is foreseen but not intended. And you might think that that's a morally significant difference. So here's what that objection looks like. Intending versus foreseeing. So on the one hand, Fred intends to cause the puppies to suffer, right? That's a crucial part, the way the thought experiment is set up. Intending the suffering of the puppies is how he produces the cocamone hormone in the first place. If the puppies are not suffering, that particular hormone, the cocamone hormone, would not be produced and he wouldn't get the pleasure from the chocolate. So Fred does intend to cause the suffering of the puppies. But when it comes to factory farming, that is not the case. In the case of factory farming, the suffering is not intended. It's only a bad side effect. Right, so that's not the main thing that's being intended, the suffering of the animals. Rather, it's just a bad side effect. It's something that we wish we could avoid, but we can't. So then how does Norcross respond to this particular objection? Well, there's several things that he says in response. On the one hand, he tries to show that when it comes to the doctrine of double effect, which we went through just a minute ago, it turns out that the good effect that's produced has to outweigh the bad effect that's only a side effect, the bad effect that's unintended. Otherwise, the doctrine of double effect does not work. So the way we can put that then is that the doctrine of double effect requires that the bad effect be outweighed by the good effect. So then is that the case with regard to factory farming? Norcross thinks no, it's not the case. The pleasure that we get from eating animals does not outweigh the suffering that's caused in the process. Now, I've had many students that say, actually, no, let's be careful, because it's actually required that we eat meat, that it has something to do with health, that if you don't eat meat, that you won't get enough protein, and that means that people will be unhealthy. So many people think that this is the case, that the good effect actually does outweigh the bad effect, because eating meat is required in order to be healthy, to have enough protein and so forth. But the plain fact of the matter is that that's just not the case. That's just not true. There are millions of different vegetarians and vegans out there. Many different people who don't eat meat, and they're perfectly healthy. My wife is one of them, and they are able to make it through their life and have plenty of protein. There's other ways that you can have protein, so it's not required for good health that you eat meat. So then that seems to show that the good effect does not outweigh the bad effect, the suffering that's involved in slaughtering of these factory farm animals. So then even if the suffering is only foreseen but not actually intended, still nonetheless, it doesn't look like that's going to make it permissible. In fact, you might think that the sheer amount of suffering that's involved makes it impermissible. Now, another way that Norcross responds to this objection is by offering a kind of a modified Fred case. Right? In this modified case, we're supposed to imagine that instead of actually torturing the puppies in his basement, let's say that what we do instead is that we have the puppies drink Drano, or some sort of a drainer type clog cleaner chemical, something that would actually cause them to suffer and to die. But here, in this modified version of the Fred case, the suffering is actually a side effect of drinking the Drano. So in that particular case, when you give them Drano or whatever kind of chemical, that's what you're directly doing, but you're not directly causing the suffering. Instead, the suffering is a side effect. But I think most of us would agree that would still be morally wrong. That would still be a situation where we hold Fred morally accountable for the harm that he inflicts upon these puppies. And if that's true, then it looks like we do not have a morally relevant difference, which again is what we are trying to get. We are trying to show that fourth premise was false. The premise that says that there is no morally relevant difference between these cases, the Fred case and the factory farming case. So intending versus merely being foreseen, according to Norcross at least, is not a good enough objection. That objection can be avoided. Now, the next objection that I think it's worth considering is the idea that there's like something special about puppies. There is just something special about puppies. So one way that we can think about this particular objection here is by saying that, well, puppies are more morally valuable than farm animals. But the way that Norcross responds to this is he tries to show that there's no sort of actual justification that we can give for that. Some cultures actually eat dogs, and some cultures treat things like pigs or cows to be very valuable in those cultures. So it's just that we happen to live in a culture where we treat puppies as a part of our family and we treat cows as food. That's just contingent upon where you happen to live, your geographical location. There's nothing morally significant built into that. In fact, Norcross thinks that if we were to say, well, look, like maybe some animals are more intelligent than other animals, and so that could justify it, Norcross would say then it's morally fine, it's morally permissible to treat unintelligent human beings like food, and that just seems absurd. And so his response introduces what's sometimes called the problem of marginal cases, which we will look at here in a little bit. But let me just flag that for now. The problem of marginal cases. So now, as I mentioned previously, a large part of this paper is Norcross going through different objections and trying to respond to them, trying to show why those objections are not good, why we can dismiss them, where it turns out that there is no morally significant difference between the cases that we're considering. So what we're going to do in the next video is start considering some other sorts of objections worth thinking about that Norcross considers. So that's what we will do next.